Well, what's up again there, guys? Brian here, the 3 Topics Gamer, and I have another worst to best list video to share with you guys today. Now, for this particular worst to best, I'll be ranking all of the primary 6 entries in the Lord of the Rings series, which compares to the original Lord of the Rings trilogy, and the 3 films that make up the Hobbit trilogy, and just going over which ones I think are from worst to best. Now, like always, remember that this listing and ranking is just my own personal opinion, so don't feel too bad if there's an entry that is placed in a specific spot. However, I think that once we get to probably past the halfway mark, I really don't think too many people would actually disagree with me. But heck, maybe I'll be wrong. So, starting off at the very low, the worst out of the primary 6 films in this series undoubtedly has to go to The Hobbit: Battle of the Five Armies. This is the Hobbit trilogy in general is a proven example of studio interference in dragging out a book far longer than it ever needed to be. There was no business for The Hobbit, of all of the Lord of the Rings related films, to be treated and split into multiple parts. If anything, I think you could have done it with, I would say, either the Fellowship of the Rings, the Two Towers, or Return of the King. I think any one of them could have been split up into 2 films. There was enough material, but certainly not The Hobbit. They added so many things into the Battle of the Five Armies, and it felt like it was seriously dragging. And if you've actually watched some of the behind the scenes information out there, Peter Jackson himself admitted that, he was kind of winging it by the time we got to the Battle of the Third Armies. He was kind of just making things without a finished script and then just not even knowing what to do. If he hadn't had like 20 years of experience making other films, he probably would not have made that film in the condition that it was in. And I would say the movie was very, very rushed, very, very messy. Things were just kind of happening that were just kind of felt out of order, and it just screams studio interference. Now, I will give him credit for at least being able to make a film that's somewhat coherent, and I think that if any other director had been put in the position that he was in, I don't think I think the film would have been considerably worse than it was. Now, overall, I don't think it's a truly awful film. I can definitely see that they tried, but at the end of the day, that film is still just a mess. And it is, without question, in my opinion, the worst out of the Hobbit films and out of the 6 primary entries in the Lord of the Rings series. So that's why it's at the bottom. Followed up by that, I'm going to have to go with, I believe, the first Hobbit film. And I think that one is called A Journey Begins or something like that. I think the first one of the Hobbit films is pretty solid. Again, it kind of does something. The problem with the Hobbit films in general, which I didn't even mention it when I was talking about Battle of the Five Armies, but I think the problem is that when you really read The Hobbit itself, it's a book that was really made for children. And the problem in generally with all these films is they're trying to elevate its essence to the standard of a Lord of the Rings film. It's trying to raise its level of epicness up to that level, and it just doesn't work. I mean, there are things that are added, there are things that are done that just don't really make much sense. And I think that the introduction of all of the dwarves themselves is really, really hard to keep track of all of them. I mean, I think there's 13 dwarves, and I think that most people can only keep track of maybe 7 numbers, so you kind of want to stick to sticking to 7 characters. Otherwise, you have all these different characters. I challenge anyone to see if you can actually name all 13 dwarves that come with Bilbo. Now, I think that the performances from Bilbo Baggins of Bilbo Baggins and Gandalf, I think their characters are handled very well, but I think the dwarves are just a little too all over the place. Now, there are definitely some key scenes from the book that I think are executed very well, and I think that overall, the first Hobbit film is a good film, and it works, but overall, it still suffers from the problems that the Hobbit trilogy in general kind of suffer from, and that's why I would place it 5th on my list. Going on to number 4 spot, I would have to go with The Hobbit: The Desolation of Smaug. I think that this one is definitely the best one out of the Hobbit trilogy, even though it still kind of repeats a number of the same mistakes that the trilogy in general make. I think that it at least is the most coherent. I think that the entire scene with Bilbo interacting with Smaug was, without question, not only the highlight of the books, but I think it was definitely the highlight of the entire trilogy. I think the performances are best handled here. I think some of the action scenes are definitely cool. There are some people that have a problem that Legolas was kind of shoehorned in, but I think that at least in this entry, I at least understand that even though I do believe he's not even in the book in general, I think that he at least would have at least been mentioned during this particular era, especially when you consider the characters that are put in place. And that is why I think out of all of the Hobbit films, this one, at least for me, kind of works the best, which is why I would say that it kind of scrapes the bottom barrel of what you would consider a great film. And even the whole chase scene in the mines, even though it's definitely overdone, I think is fun to watch, which is why I would place Desolation of Smaug, The Hobbit, or The Hobbit, Desolation of Smaug, number 4 on my list. Now we go into the original Lord of the Rings trilogy, and all of these films are absolutely A plus movies. They are the Lord of the Rings trilogy is without doubt one of the greatest trilogies ever made. I would easily pick it over the original Star Wars trilogy any day. I don't know about the Toy Story trilogy, even though I'm not sure you can call it a trilogy since it's a 4 entry, but I'm getting off track. Lowest of the original Lord of the Rings trilogy, I would say I would have to give it to The Fellowship of the Rings. Great film, no question. I've watched it multiple times. I've watched the extended cut multiple times. Absolutely fantastic film. But I just think that this one, I think just if I had to pick a problem, I think that keeping the Fellowship together, I mean, is not a bad thing, but I think it keeps it a little bit too simple, which is not a bad thing. Again, trust me, it's the first intro, so you kind of want to keep it simple. But I think that keeping it simple just kind of makes it the least exciting out of the primary 3 entries in the trilogy, but it's still a great film. I think the cinematography, I think the acting, action set pieces, visuals, I cannot believe this film is as old as it is, and it still looks good. It looks better than a lot of films that come out today. And overall, it is still just a great film that holds up. These 3 films are the essence of a perfect film that I don't think ever at any point needs to be updated or remade. I think they're fine just the way they are. And it all started right here with The Fellowship of the Rings. Still an excellent movie if you haven't seen it already, which if you haven't, what the heck are you doing? Going into the number 2 spot, I would have to go with The Two Towers. Again, everything that the Fellowship did was definitely elevated in the sequel. What I find most impressive, especially when it comes to Two Towers and Return of the King, is their ability to put enough time into multiple different storylines going on as well. With Fellowship, it only ever jumped between 2 different groups of people. You were focusing on what the Fellowship was doing and what Saruman was doing. With this one, you're able to switch between what Saruman is doing, what Gandalf is doing, even though he technically is only in the film for, I think, like, maybe less than 15 minutes. So there isn't really much focus on him, but there is focus on what Merry and Pippin are doing with the trees, and what Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli are doing, and what Frodo and Sam are doing with Gollum. Like, it's able to put enough focus on each of these different events that are playing at different times, and it still creates a very smooth flowing film that has all the action, all the right cinematography, all the badassness, all the epicness, the amazing music. Just, again, another amazing film, great entry, hardly really any complaints, and that is only elevated to its absolute maximum level with obviously my favorite entry in the Lord of the Rings films, and it has to go to The Return of the King. Return of the King is definitely, in my opinion, my favorite out of the primary 3. It definitely has probably one of the best endings, even though I will say this, a lot of people have complained about this, and even though I will admit that it does kind of, I am a little bit on board with its big issue in terms of the ending, in which the ending is very, very extended. It kind of feels like it has like 4 different endings, and you're just kind of waiting for the film to end. But I think that it's very well built. I think that the action set pieces are definitely the best here. The acting is definitely the best here. The visuals, the location, the amount of balance, the settings, the build-up, everything has been leading up to this film, and this film does not disappoint in the slightest. This is, without question, my favorite entry in the Lord of the Rings series. It is a great conclusion to a great set of films, and that is, I'm just trying to come up with this positive thing to say, just because of just how amazing Return of the King is. So, yeah, out of all of them, Return of the King is my favorite entry in the Lord of the Rings series, and why I consider it the best. So, yeah, that is my worst to best ranking of the Lord of the Rings films. If you could actually rank these films from worst to best, how would you do it? Share your ranking with me and everyone else in the comments down below. And if you like this video, please do not forget to like, subscribe, keep track of me and all my future videos and ideas that I will be uploading for the future. And like always, thank you guys for watching. You're awesome, and I will see you next time.